And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, June 1st. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today we go to the East Coast where we talk with Denise Watso, who's in New York City. We're going to talk with her a little bit about the state recognition of tribes in Vermont. She's a member of the Abenaki nation from that whole region and wants to let people know what she's concerned about this state recognition process that's going on. Let's talk to her a little bit. Denise Watso, thank you for joining with us today on the Native News Update. I'd like to give you a chance to introduce yourself to our watching audience today. Let us know where you are and let us know a little bit about who you are and why you're concerned about this whole issue of state recognition that's been going on.
Well, I've always lived in Albany, New York. I'm the New York State liaison for the Abenaki Nation. We are federally recognized in Canada, but our original territories have always been through Vermont, New Hampshire, up into Quebec, and we have a state recognition that's happening in Vermont, and the laws have been passed, and this is extremely concerning because the groups that are being state recognized have already failed the federal recognition process because there's absolutely no evidence of Abenaki ancestry, and that was determined. Go ahead.
Okay, well, let me ask you a few clarifying questions. There's a lot of people who offhand may have heard of the Abenaki, also known as the Wabanaki, affiliated or related perhaps distantly to the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet and some of the other tribes, East Coast. Wabanaki meaning the people of the Eastern Doorway as we know them in the Great Lakes area where I'm at. You said these groups have failed federal recognition, so it's not an issue. Is it an issue of whether or not they're a bona fide tribe or descendants of tribe? If they failed the federal recognition, the federal government says that they don't fit the criteria. Is that true?
That's exactly true. The most established group is the St. Francis Missisquoi that was established by Homer St. Francis and April Merrill, his daughter, back about 20 years ago or so. That's the most established group. This group applied for federal recognition and was denied by the commissioner of the BIA, Carl Altman.
Okay.
And that determination came out, and it's online on the Bureau of Indian Affairs website. So that, in and of itself, proved there was no GM. They failed every criteria except for the last three that they met as a group, that they were a social group, but the rest of the recognition process failed. And the Vermont Attorney General proved the same and agreed with the determination of Carl Altman. Or Artman, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Carl Artman.
So that the most established group actually failed. And then in the last probably 6 years, four other groups who were splinter groups of this initial group broke off and created non-for-profits and set them up as boards with chiefs or sachems or whatever. And then they started to lobby the state of Vermont and ask for a commission. A native commission, and it's all filled with non-native people who claim actually to be my ancestor. One of them is Luke Willard, who claims to be. So the issue is that they're claiming things that are false, that are wrong.
They're claiming to be related to even your family in this case?
Exactly, and my family is Watso, which originally the spelling was Wajo, W-H-A-O, which means mountain, and our ancestral name, even going back further, was Otandasan, and that is the name that they are using for their state recognition process. These groups and state recognition lobby a state and say, groups will go to the state and say we would like state recognition to the legislators. They're not dealing with the Aboriginal people, the original inhabitants, us, of Vermont. Our ancestors are buried in what is now called Vermont. the records are embedded. Our historical records are embedded and embraced in these lands. It is undisputed, hands down, clear evidence. But what these groups have been allowed to do in Vermont is tell a story, tell the spin that they're all in hiding in Vermont, that it's racist to ask who your family is, when we know as Indian people, it's an honor to tell people who our family names are. If I introduce, for example, I was speaking with a Cherokee woman out west, Kara Cohen Watts, who's a legislator for the Cherokee Nation, and they are the leading opponents of state recognition. They have more than 200 groups claiming to be Cherokee. So this is a huge travesty. They almost did get state recognition in the state of Tennessee, 6 groups, and they were successful in defending their territory against false tribes, fake tribes claiming to be. Go ahead.
Same thing that you just mentioned amongst the Cherokees. Oh, our people hid out somewhere, and they are legitimate Cherokees, they are legitimate Abenakis, but you don't find them on rolls, census materials, and 200 to 300 years later, they want to reattach themselves to something. Federal recognition, I can understand. There's a lot of people that simply say, well, geez, if you're a recognized tribe, you can have a casino. Why are these people so intent on state recognition? Does it have to do with eventually going back up to the federal government?
That I'm not sure. I know one is they're interested in selling their crafts as Indian made. And that was one of the arguments. But what happens with state recognition, these groups will go and lobby the legislators. So unbeknownst to them, these are, how can a state legislator take on such a tremendous task without the resources? In Vermont, they're 2-year term. So my question is, how can these legislators think that they can make such a determination? It's actually stacked against Aboriginal people, because if you're original inhabitant, they go to the state legislators, they give them their spin of their story, they actually create their own commission, and it's stacked with all of their members, and then from there they handpicked experts. The experts are the people who they have been collaborating with to create these stories, and then the experts actually evaluate the applicants who are on the commission. So there's this tremendous ethical issue as well. It's a conflict, huge conflict of interest for the very same people who are on the commission are also these so-called tribes, which they are not, because we didn't have tribes and bands, and that's what they're calling them. And they're calling them family bands in Vermont. And so you have this huge conflict, and we also have the press in Vermont treating it as though it's Indian versus Indian, which is further from the truth. If we were not the original inhabitants, why would these groups claim to be our ancestors? Like, claim to be my family member when in fact that's false. I proved it and sent numerous press releases and letters and emails and went to Vermont with family members, and we were denied our Aboriginal rights. We were invited to speak. Senator Luzzi is the chair of this commission, and he has been advocating for this for years, and he has actually been designated an honorary chief of one of these tribes. And actually, Governor Shumlin, almost 10 years ago, recognized the Mohegans, as a senator. Almost, it's on my blog if you want to check that out. I had the whole, like a 3-story series outlining exactly what happened. And so this gentleman, he went to Vermont, he dressed up, he carried a paddle all around the state house in Montpelier, and convinced legislators that he was a Mohican, a totally made-up tribe. There's no existence of the Mohicans. He even spelled it as Mohick, Hick, and they actually put a resolution passed through and signed literally by Senator Shumlin almost 6 or 10 years ago, something like that. It's on their legislative site. And then he was the leader in passing this one and signing the legislation, even though I have provided them with evidence that these groups are not related, they have no ancestry, that the most established group in Vermont is not had been denied federal recognition, and the rest were splinters. And in the Federal Register for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they actually state splinter groups cannot be recognized.
Right.
So,
if anything, they should be folded in. That is, as if there are people who are actual descendants, then they either belong on rolls of descendancy in Canada or the U.S. Because is there a federally recognized Abenaki in the United States?
no,
I don't
but
think.
no, our reserve is located at Abenaki, and
Right.
these groups have said that we're Canadian, which is false. We are not Canadian Indians. For further from the truth, we're original inhabitants. Most of our members uh, live in Albany, New York, and Waterbury, Connecticut. We're scattered throughout New England.
Right.
So even though, because we sided with the French, our territory, we moved into Odanak, a little mission village, we've always come back and forth to original territories. We've never left. But
Right.
these groups, in order to meet their needs of not having any existence or history in Vermont, that's one of the stories. It's either we're all hiding in hiding out from eugenics. We were all hiding out because of racism. It's racist to ask my family name, and those people are Canadians, or the favorite they call us expatriates, which is really to me
Frustrating.
extremely frustrating, because we were denied our Aboriginal rights. We were invited to testify. We all went there. Council member Jacques Watso, who's an elected council member, came with Elaine Obamsawin,
Right.
who's also an elected council member. We all met. They came from up north. We came from New York. All drove there, and none of the senators would allow us to speak. We should have been sitting there with duct tape on our mouth. It was extremely
Frustrating.
rights violation. The UN Declaration of Aboriginal Rights,
Right.
Indigenous peoples, was thoroughly denied our right.
Right. Let's for today's news, we've already used up over 10 minutes on this, and so we've got to close it out real quick. We do want to talk with you again about this and follow it a little bit more now that we've introduced that subject. But I've always said that there's always a key to knowing when someone might not be telling the truth is when they say, my great 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 grandfather was a Cherokee princess. And right away, you got to watch out for that kind of stuff. Denise, thanks for giving us that explanation. Let's get back to you as this goes along, because I don't think this battle is over either for the Cherokees or North Carolina, the East Coast tribes. We see this again and again where there's groups that crop up, and we want to keep an eye on it, because I think there's really some legitimacy to the idea that people who know their history, and perhaps don't even need to be recognized to be Abenaki. You know what I mean? When you're pursuing this at some level, there's some things that are reasonably achievable, but you got so many splinters groups up there, like you said, all these little splinter groups from the splinter groups, it's getting harder and harder. So we'll come back to you again. Quickly close it out. Tell us where we can get a hold of you if someone wants some more information on this.
You can get a hold of me. My email is ab8naki@earthlink.net. I also have a blog, Abenaki News blog, Denise Watso's Abenaki News blog on Google, or those two media would be fine to get in touch with me.
Okay. What we'll do is we'll put that on a ticker roller here when we're doing the news. People will see it. I expect that some people are going to get a hold of you, but thanks again for joining us today. We got to go for now. We'll do it again.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian country on this edition of the Native News Update. Stop in again soon, and miigwech for showing up.